We're in the final 2 weeks of the OHL's regular season, and for the Barrie Colts, finally getting a look at the Sarnia Sting here on home ice. The Colts, of course, already played in Sarnia earlier this season. And to talk a little bit about the Sting, it's a familiar voice, Terry Doyle, who does the play-by-play and host duties on your TV in Sarnia. Terry, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride this season for the Sting. How have you been handling the broadcast?
You know what? It's been interesting at least. It's not predictable and it makes the fun of junior hockey. I know, they started the year 6-2-2, first 10, thinking, okay, they're playing a little over their head. And then November and December came and things went downhill. And then late, before the Christmas break and then after, it seemed to level off. And then a little rough stretch in about a dozen games. But hey, it's the fun of junior hockey. And I always like to say, expect the unexpected, or you never know what you're going to get when it comes to junior hockey. And it's been a case. There have been some late game situations. The Sting have gone to overtime 18 games this year between home and road games. So a few Sunday dinners I may have been late for as well. But overall, it's been a very interesting team to be around all season.
And this is a younger team too in the OHL. So you kind of expect there's going to be games that, might get away from them, and those are used as learning experiences. But still, there's got to be a lot of excitement around this Sting team when you look at players like Diorio and Beamish, Edwards. It looks like it's a good core that's shaping up for this team going forward.
Well, it's an interesting fan base, Mike, because of course you've got some people excited and you got some people that have the torches and pitchforks out because it's a community impatient group, but that's the passion of junior hockey fans as well. But indeed, the Sting basically have two first round picks from last year's OHL draft. Alessandro Diorio, who went second overall, and Beckham Edwards, who would have gone higher, but was seriously considering his options. He's from the Kamoka, suburban London area, basically, but played in the States last year, played minor hockey in Michigan, and was seriously weighing his options. So the Sting took him in the third round, and over the summer decided to come to Sarnia and leading the Sting in goal scoring as a 16-year-old first-year player. So I think it really shows they have that future. Liam Beamish indeed takes advantage of the situation with the NCAA rules and comes in. So it allows them to have a good young core, and it's a young core that they're going to develop with moving forward. And sure, I'd say two-thirds of their overagers maybe have not been contributing as much as they would have liked, but it's all about the young guys right now, and that's the key. And if you said coming into the season what to expect out of the Sarnia Sting, it would be take a run at a playoff spot, be in the thick of things for a playoff spot right down to the final weekend of the regular season and check those boxes. Right now, that appears to be where the Sting are headed.
Yeah, and right now, sitting seventh in the Western Conference standings. Quite the race, though. Owen Sound taking, of course, the eighth seed, leapfrogging the Sioux Greyhounds, who fall to ninth. So right now, it seems like it's anyone's guess as to who's going to make the playoffs in the West.
That's exactly it. And, right down to the wire. And who knows, are we in for one of those one game playoff situations on the Tuesday after the regular season to decide who gets in if we have a tie for eighth place between eighth and ninth? So be very interesting right now. There's sort of, as you and I talk, some odd numbers there where one of those teams loses in overtime, for example, and one more point would maybe even them back up because where the Sioux stands, as you and I talk, they would need a 1 point game to even up with some of those other teams. Of course, they want the two. So yeah, it's made things, lots of scoreboard watching. I know on Wednesday night, as we were calling the game with the Sting and the Erie Otters, here we are keeping eyes on the Owen Sound attack on home ice against the Flint Firebirds because it had so much implications on what happens in the West as well. And little scoreboard watching doesn't hurt anybody as well as you keep an eye on what's going on elsewhere. One team's winning, next thing you know, the other team's winning, and scoreboard watching in junior hockey can be all over the place.
And for the Sarnia Sting of late, it's been a bit of a tough go. Let's not talk about that 9-0 loss to the London Knights because right now the Knights a bit of a juggernaut right now in the OHL. But still, you're seeing that this is a team competing. Last night, the game got a little away from them against the Erie Otters, where it was a bit of a back and forth and the Erie taking it late. But still, it just goes to show that this is a pretty resilient group that's learning, but they're still in these hockey games and competing night in, night out.
And for the Sting, they're still coming off of the run from 2 years ago where they made it to the OHL Western Conference Final for the first time in their franchise history. And that was huge for the Sting. But of course, with that comes the pain of loading up 1 year. You're going to go through some growing pains. And you look right now, if the Sting didn't make a lot of major moves, the best player on the Sarnia Sting right now may have been Porter Martone. because he was, of course, their fifth overall pick a few years ago, traded to the Steelheads as part of the moves to bring in Ethan Del Mastro, bring in Luca Del Belbaluz from the Steelheads. And the other player who went in that deal, Angus MacDonnell, just signed with the Dallas Stars. So you think if Sarnia doesn't go for that run 2 years ago, here are a couple of their big names for this year. They don't have a Diorio, for example, because they probably would pick lower, but that's the cycle of junior hockey where you have to go for it. And Sarnia had that opportunity 2 years ago, saw they had a good group, needed to add to it, and that really took over the market. Being the first time the Sting had gone to the Western Final, you had people literally camped out overnight for tickets and lined up around the building because Sarnia decided to let's just say stick it to London a little bit and decided the tickets wouldn't go online for sale. You had to get them in person because they were worried about fans for London taking over the rink. So I said, no, you have to line up, which sure annoyed a few Sarnia people as well, but it was quite a spectacle to see. So Sarnia, therefore, mortgaged the future when they did that, and that's what they're dealing with right now. But that's the promising signs we're seeing right now are those young players, the Diorios, the Edwards, the Beamish. Lucas Fisher still has another full year of junior eligibility coming up next season, the St. Louis Blues second round pick. Houston Hurt's only in his second season. So many young players they've brought in, and they've had to work with the young guys. And Evan Millette, who's been the second goaltender for much of the season, is a guy who's certainly shown he can play in the Ontario Hockey League as well. So, they'll have to go through some growing pains as they did last year, sort of officially bottomed out last year, now amidst the playoffs, of course, and now moving forward. And now this young group is going to be back next season, and the Stinger probably going to have a top 7 pick in the OHL draft coming up in April and continue to build moving forward. And they'll keep an eye on players they've chosen that were considering the school route. But now with the NCAA rule change, do they get a couple more players coming in? So many factors, but it is indeed seeing a Beckham Edwards in over 20 goals. Don't see too many 16-year-olds scoring 20 goals in the Ontario Hockey League unless maybe they're named Stamkos, for example. So I think that's where you look at that situation where that's the positivity in terms of growing forward, where they're establishing themselves. And really over the last couple of years now, after making those big moves, restocking the draft picks, restocking young players. And sure, it's resulted in some ups and downs this year, but that's the way junior hockey works. You want to see players making progress, and those young guys certainly have been.
And a comparable in the Eastern Conference would be the Peterborough Petes, who won the championship that year that Sarnia went to the Western Conference final. They went all in, and now they're rebuilding. Mind you, they're not going to be seeing playoff hockey this year, but for Sarnia, they're going to get that playoff experience. It might be against one of those top teams in the Western Conference, but still, having that experience can go a long way for this group.
That's exactly it. And you're right. You look at a team that goes for it. The Barrie Colts in their franchise history have gone through that a couple of times as well. And that's where an Aaron Ekblad came into the organization, for example, as an exceptional player because the Colts picked first overall because they had bottomed out after going for it a couple of years before that. So it all works out from that standpoint. And I do agree that getting some playoffs experience is huge. And that's where the Sting, and I think any team, some people say, well, does it matter if you make the playoffs and go out in 4 or 5 games in the first round? I think it does because I think you get that experience and you learn what it takes to play playoff hockey. Playoff hockey is different. There's just a different mentality, a different, you finish your checks. You have to bury those opportunities because if not, you make one mistake and it's in the back of your net, back the other direction. And, I go back to the 2008 playoffs. I know it's the history books a little bit, but Windsor Spitfires had a pretty solid team. They were the 3rd seed, took on a 6th seed Sarnia Sting team, and Steven Stamkos single-handedly eliminated the Windsor Spitfires in 5 games, having 9 goals in those 5 games. Windsor won the Memorial Cup each of the next 2 years. And I think that's in that series, even that 5-game series, that young Windsor group at the time with your Taylor Halls and your Ryan Ellises and players like that, that's where they learned playoff hockey and realized how disappointed they were that they didn't step up their game for the playoffs. And then the next 2 years, of course, and they went 11 straight rounds of playoffs over the next 3 seasons. So I think indeed, even if you just have a 4 or 5 game series, you still have that opportunity to get playoff experience. I think that's huge for any team in the OHL.
Well, it's funny that you bring up 2008 because I was actually covering the Kitchener Rangers a bit that year, and they played Sarnia in the second round. And I got to meet some of the Sting fans who made the trip to the Odd, and I was quite impressed with the passion that the Sarnia faithful have. And you've been now covering the Sting for quite a while, so is this an organization or a fan base that's ready for a championship caliber team, a team that could go on a run, much like what we saw 2 years ago?
Oh, they're absolutely ready. You look at this team's been around about 30 years, coming over. Of course, the franchise moved from Cornwall to Newmarket. and then Sarnia, yeah, they're hungry and they've been disappointed. They've had a lot of times, oh 06, 10, and 14 picked first overall. So to have a stretch of every 4 years picking first overall is not something that a franchise wants to hang their hat on. So that's why the moves 2 years ago to go to the Western Final, have a run. Sure, they ran into London in the Western Final, but that was huge because it had not happened here before in Sarnia. And you're right, it's a passionate fan base. It's kind of a blue collar fan base a little bit as well. So they're certainly into it. And you're right, that 2008 Mike Duco in triple overtime in game two, which at the time was one of the longest games in OHL history, certainly makes things very interesting. The Sting ran into obviously a strong '08 Kitchener Rangers team that hosted the Memorial Cup and won the OHL title that year, but made things quite interesting. But yeah, when Steve Mason's backstopping their team with the Rangers back then, made things a little bit of a difference as well. And even that series, the only guy to score a couple of goals against him was a guy named Stamkos, who's done pretty well for himself afterwards. But yeah, it's very interesting to see. But Sarnia has become a group that they've got their diehards that travel all over the place. There's one family. I'm guessing they've been to every game this year. They'll probably be in Barrie on Saturday night and up to the Sioux, down to Erie, you name it, over to Ottawa. They've just, around the Sting. They still, we don't see that many fan buses anymore, but the Sting still have a few fan bus trips every year going to different places, either an overnight road trip or down to Windsor next week. I know they're still planning if they can get enough to go on that. So it is an interesting group. They're so passionate that sometimes I kind of think, okay, you've got to think about what you're talking about. And, they're, complain about the coach or complain about why the goalie isn't playing and things like, remember, you are fans. There are people that have bigger business cards than all of us that kind of know what's going on the inside, but you have to have that passion. If you don't have that passion, then it just makes for a pretty mediocre situation. I know sometimes, even nowadays, the keyboard warriors get out on social media with their critiques, but even the Sting brass kind of remind themselves, we'd rather that than our fans not caring about us at all.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, with that passion comes the fans, the knee-jerk reactions. But you get that in every level, and it's a good sign, like you said, that's a healthy organization. And we got the playoffs coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and we still don't know if the Sarnia Sting will make the postseason. But when you look at this picture right now in the Western Conference, you're quite familiar with the teams in the West. Do you see London being a little unstoppable here, or do you think there's a team that could challenge them?
I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's London's to lose, obviously, from that standpoint, which anyone would say that at this point. But sometimes London can get ahead of themselves a little bit and just not take a night off, but just, that when you're winning so much, sometimes you just let off the gas a little bit and a team takes over and gets on a little bit of a run. And in a 7-game series, if a team, the momentum swing goes back the other way for a couple of games, it can make a huge difference. I certainly wouldn't write off the Kitchener Rangers the way they've played all season. And the Windsor Spitfires, talk about bouncing back from last year where they severely underachieved. And it's a big Windsor team. And you get into a playoff series and they can wear you down deeper into a series with a lot of big guys. Like that Windsor team, there are only a couple of guys under 6 foot. And I know when I go to choose who to do an intermission interview with in Windsor, I know I'm going to strain my neck unless I pick one or two guys because I'm going to be staring way up at them. And unless I get the milk crate out or something to stand on, or a little bit step stool, because they're just such a big group. And I joke usually when I see Windsor 3 times a year, whoever I choose, I turn to say, you're not getting any shorter here, or I am, one or the other, because I feel like they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and you get into a series. And then, I think that's going to make things very interesting. Obviously, a Saginaw and Erie are going to say, hey, don't forget about us. And Saginaw still has that pedigree of going to the Western Final last year and a lot of players back from the Memorial Cup Championship. But, obviously, London has to be the favorite in the Western Conference. But I think that's where a Kitchener and a Windsor might lean on that and say, all right, London, you go right ahead. You be the favorites. We'll just come in. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting in the West to see. And I think the thing for those top 3 teams that I just mentioned will be to get through their first round series cleanly. Because sometimes you'll see that where maybe that first round series drags to a 6th game and a 7th game and you get through it, but it takes a physical toll on you. And then you really wear yourselves down going into a second round series, for example.
Yeah, depth and the health, that's going to be big factors for teams come playoff time. And Terry, thank you very much for coming on here talking about the Sting, and hopefully you'll be able to call some playoff games in a couple weeks.
Absolutely, anytime.
So that's Sarnia Sting, play-by-play voice and host Terry Doyle. He's a man of many hats when it comes to broadcasting, also doing the OHL News radio edition, also doing the intermission features on your TV broadcasts across the Ontario Hockey League. So it's always great to catch up with Terry, talk a little bit about the Sting, and also the playoff picture in the Western Conference. So the Sting, they are in Barrie Saturday night. Puck drop will be at 7:30. Gene and I will have the call on Rogers TV. It's always fun when the Sting come to town. There's just something about that logo. It's one of the tops in the OHL. Might have to do a ranking at some point. But either way, thanks again to Terry for joining us. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Talk to you again soon.